Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be continuing our exploration of e4, e5, and we're going to be looking at an opening today known as the bishop's opening, which is basically the move 2 bishop to c4. Now, before we go any further, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So anyways, the move I'm recommending here is to play the move knight f6. You want to put some immediate pressure on this e4 pawn and make white decide how exactly he's going to defend. This obviously also defends against any type of beginner tricks here with the 4-move checkmate like queen f3, and of course if he were to play queen h5 we would simply take his queen. The bishop's opening is an extremely popular opening, especially on the lower levels, like at the club levels and at the lower levels, because it's a way for club players to, number one, take people out of their book, and number two, to possibly play for really cheap things like the 4-move checkmate with bishop c4 and queen f3 or queen h5. I was actually kind of shocked to discover that it does actually get played on the Grandmaster level as well, quite a bit. For similar reasons to why grandmasters will employ things like the Scotch, or why grandmasters will employ things like the Italian game. Now, those two openings do get played more than the bishop's opening, but the bishop's opening gets employed often for the same reason, which is there's not that many things that black tends to play against the bishop's opening, and because of that, it allows white to prepare a line very, very deeply, and it allows white to, again, potentially take his opponent out of his own theoretical preparation. So white has two choices here. White can play knight c3 and turn this into a Vienna game, or white can play the move pawn to d3 and keep this a bishop's opening. So we're not going to cover the Vienna move. I have a Vienna video for that that's already out, and you can check that out. So we're going to cover the bishop's opening move with pawn to d3, and now I'm going to recommend the move that I was always told was kind of the equalizer in the bishop's opening, and that's the move pawn to c6. So basically you're going to strike at the middle, just kind of taking advantage of the fact that this bishop is on c4 and we can gain a tempo. Also, what's interesting is we're taking advantage of the fact, if you notice, this looks very similar to like what we would call like a molar attack, or something that we would see out of the Italian game. You know, something we would see out of the quiet game with an early c3 and d4 for white after he's developed knight f3 and bishop c4. The difference here for black is there actually is no bishop on c5, and that actually makes it a little bit easier for black to enforce his pawn to d5. So for example, after knight f3, we play c6, knight f3. We're going to immediately strike in the middle with the move d5. And in the molar attack, we would take and we would play check. So let's see what happens. If we were to play e takes d5, c takes d5, and then bishop check, we would play this normal bishop d7, knight on b to d7. And one of the really great things that black has going for him here is, number one, white's spent a move to play d2, d3, so he's going to be very unlikely to want to two-step that pawn to d5 like he would in kind of a typical molar attack. In this case, d4, because, you know, the positions are obviously reversed. But also there's not going to be a bishop that he can bully on the c5 square when he does play pawn on d3 to d4 to gain that space in the middle. So basically, black has just taken a very comfortable control of the center of the board, and he's going to be able to hold it for an extended period of time. Now, I didn't find a ton of high-level games where people are willing to hazard this position with white, but I did come across one that was played by Beliavsky in 1978, and basically all that happened is black just kind of held his center. He just played bishop d6, he played a6 to keep the knight out of b5, he castled and just played really solid moves. After knight h4, he gained that space with d4, and you can just kind of watch, he just plays very typical, just restrictive moves, trying to keep the knight out of f5, etc. And then he ends up fianchettoing his bishop kind of the long way. He's willing to exchange queens because he has more space, and there's this huge weakness on c2. But eventually, white's position was just awful, because, again, this domination of the middle of the board really does matter. And after c4, dc3, white resigned in Oca de Eshwan versus Beliavsky in Alicante in 1978. And white just kind of resigned because he's losing a whole bunch of pawns and he still doesn't have the middle of the board. Black's position is really, really solid here. So that's kind of how you play that if they exchange. You just take the center of the board and you hold it, and black just has a really, really excellent position. It's actually pretty amazing. So I think at the club level, that's actually what you're going to see more often than not. You're going to see people actually play this move, e takes d5, and you're going to get that center of the board, and all you really got to do is hold it. Now, at the higher levels, when people do this, they almost universally play bishop b3 because they know that that's no good. So I know that the immediate question that everybody is asking is, well, if they retreat that bishop, can I just win this pawn for free? Can I play d takes e4? So after d takes e4, does anybody see a strong move here? Just take a second, pause the video, and see if you can find it. So that move is knight g5, and it's just major advantage white. Black has no real good way of defending against white's threats. So an example would be really the best move is just blocking everything with bishop e6, f e6, and then we should just take the pawn on e4, not the one on e6, and then just leave black saddled with these two double isolated pawns, and white has a major advantage here. And that is why we don't do that. So after bishop to b3, what does black do? Well, black wants to, like in other positions, he wants to maintain his pawns in the middle of the board. Now, the best move here is a little debatable. It's really kind of a toss-up between do we play the move a5 or do we play the move bishop to b4 check, and which one of these is better? So in Aronian versus Caruana in Paris in 2018, that game went down the path bishop to b4 check, because black decided that he wanted to play that before he played a5. And again, sometimes these moves are combined because a5 is still good practice, where gaining space while threatening to trap this bishop, it's not a move we're going to regret later. It's a move, if anything, we can actually use it to create a queenside bind, similar to ones that we see in like the Caro-Kann. So like after a3, we're going to push again with a4, and when the bishop retreats at any point, we're going to create this potential for a long-term passed pawn on the queen side with a move like d4. And then we have this long-term bind on the queen side. So a4 is just a very useful, a5 to a4 is just a very useful move and a very useful idea in general to pull off at some point. So for example, a3, knight on b to d7, and then say castles a4. This is following the Aronian versus Caruana game. And you can kind of see the direction this went. Eventually, Aronian broke in the middle with d4. He just needs to fight back and take back his portion of the center. But Caruana's position is really solid, and he plays it very well. So this is how that game went. As you can see, it ended up going really well for Caruana. He still got a good position in the middle of the board. It turned into just kind of a classic isolated queen pawn position. White is playing against the isolated queen pawn, and Caruana is just playing the black side of this isolated queen pawn. He's got a little bit more space, and he's got a little bit more control of the center, which is usually what happens when you have an IQP. And anyways, so this is approximately an equal position at this point. There's good chances for both sides, but Caruana did manage to win a very long game. The game went 64 moves, and Caruana came out on top. Again, that was played against Aronian in Paris, France in 2018. So the other option, and the option I like a little bit better myself personally, I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of bishop b4 check, but like I said, there's a lot of strong grandmasters that like this move. They like dumping this bishop. I think it has to do with the fact that a lot of times you do end up pushing these pawns all on to dark squares in the middle, and it makes sense to get rid of this dark squared bishop if you're going to do that. I'm personally just got a bigger preference to just play a5, gain that space right away, and then I personally just like putting that bishop just right in the middle of the board, just holding my pawn on e5, and just saying I've got a better center, now what? I have no problem just maintaining this center, maintaining this pawn duo in the middle of the board. So one of the things that I like about this is if they do exchange with a move like, say, e takes d5, we get something very similar to what we had in these other games where we have a very nice control of this middle of the board. And there was actually a game, Anand actually took on d5 with the white pieces, so I'm not just hoping that weaker players do this. There's actually a lot of strong players that will try to play like this as well. They'll play e takes d5 to relieve that tension in the middle of the board, because white is constantly having to worry about d takes e4 himself. So this was a game between Anand and Yu Yang Yi in Stavanger, Norway in 2019, and that game continued knight takes d5, and this game actually went very well for black. Yu Yang Yi actually defeated Anand in Norway in 2019. The game went castles, castles, rook e1, bishop g4, knight on b to d2, knight d7. Black basically is just developing and taking advantage of the fact that he has a very nice position in the middle of the board. And this all went very well for black. Black ended up getting a very solid position in the middle of the board, ended up sacrificing material, getting a very nice attack. And he continued with following up that attack against Anand's king. Now Anand needs to figure out how to defend his king, and it's very difficult because every single one of black's pieces is going that direction. So he's going to have to give some stuff up to survive, which is very typical in these situations. And so now the exchange is gone, and now every single pawn on the planet is falling, including the 7th rank. And Anand played on for a few more moves, but already the position is pretty hopeless. He does make one more nice little mate threat here, threatening rook h8 mate, but black parries that pretty easily, and then just finishes dominating the game, bringing his king up, and now he's threatening to just bring his king up again and threaten mate. He's also threatening to bring this other rook over at some point. He can bring this rook over to c4 and this rook over to a2, for example, and threaten mate that way. There's too many mate threats and too many threats of queening this pawn for white to legitimately try anything to survive. So in this position, Anand resigned. And that's an example of what can happen. And that's actually one of the big reasons I like to maintain the tension in the middle of the board. It is also possible for white to play another move here. White can play the move knight to c3, and after knight to c3, black should just gain some space with d4, and then say knight e2, and then play something like knight a6, and go after this bishop with knight to c5. This was played in Tivyakov versus Idorshu in Azerbaijan in 2012, and again, this game actually went very well for black. In this case, white tried to break in the middle of the board with c3. Black exchanged and brought his knight to c5 anyway, and then just castled. He has a solid position in the middle of the board, and he's just kind of going after white's weaknesses. So after castles, rook e8, he just continues with putting his pieces on solid squares. White actually uses kind of a clever fork trick here, but it's forking the rook and the bishop instead of the normal knight and bishop. But in the end, after all of these moves get done, black's position in the center of the board is still solid, and he's active, and white still has a lot of weaknesses to defend. So it's just one of these positions where white never quite got off his feet, and white was happy to just kind of repeat moves here, and this game ended in a draw in Azerbaijan in 2012. Again, this was between Tivyakov and Idorshu, or whatever, however we pronounce that name. So, knight c3 is an alternative, and the one game where this took place, it did end in a draw, so it seems like a pretty reasonable alternative. And, I mean, that's about it. Those are really the only lines that you're going to face and the only lines that you're going to deal with. The position should be about equal if you just simply take this plan of striking back in the middle of the board as quickly as possible. Basically, after knight f6, d3, you're going to play c6, and after knight f3, you're going to play the move d5, and you're going to strike back in the middle of the board. And as long as you hold your center together, you're going to be doing pretty good. But again, I recommend when they retreat, we should definitely gain this space with a5. It's not something that's going to hurt us. It's something that's only going to help us down the road. So anyways, that's how we play against the bishop's opening, and I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you learned something new about chess. Thank you very much for watching.